Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are on our wonderful planet. And welcome to another brilliant installment of our live stream series. And this is called Learning to Learn in brackets again. And we'll explain that for a reason. Now, again, we are in the process of sharing our best practices, tools, insights, all of the things that we found from working with more than 250,000 managers now in more than 50 countries around the world. And as part of this live stream series, we like to bring you some of the best thought leaders that we can possibly find to unpack and bring to life some of the most pressing challenges that we're probably all facing in our organizations. One of the headlines I saw last night, as looking on X actually, was on Uber. Apparently they've let go of a large number of people in their HR department. About 23% of the HR team are apparently leaving. So again, this affects HR, it affects L&D, learning, and so on. And we're seeing this as a consistent trend in many different organizations around the world, which puts the onus and the focus very much back on us as the manager and as the leader. So we're going to get into this in more detail with Dr. Rod Brazier, who's a very, very special guest who's going to be joining us in a moment. And in terms of the rules for this, there's no rules really. This is live, things happen. Things go off piste a little bit, and that's the whole reason why we try and make this a live experience. We'd love your questions and interaction as we go through. So please, any questions that you have, please submit them in the chat. We know that we're live on a few different platforms, on Facebook, on YouTube, on LinkedIn, and probably on a live stream direct link. So whichever mechanism you have to submit questions or thoughts, please feel free to do so as we go through. And we've got some of our team live here from the UK who'll also be picking up on some of your questions and some of your thoughts. In traditional style, when we run these live streams, we like to give you an opportunity to shout out where you're from, where you're at, where's your city, what company are you representing, what's your team up to, who are you? If you feel free to do that. Just jump on the chat and let us know where you're at, which would be great. And it's nice to get a sense of where people are connecting in from all over the world. So with that, we're going to bring in Dr. Rod Brazier in a moment. So we've got someone here from Devon, very nice. We've got Martin Blight here from Devon. And I am, if you didn't know, if you couldn't tell, we're live from central London. So it's a very lovely day so far. So Dr. Rod Brazier is going to be with us in a few moments. Let's go.
Okay, let's go.
As we say, Rod, and welcome to Dr. Rod here, we say that as these goes on, the intros get bigger and bolder. This is a big intro. This is a big intro.
Unbelievable, Wayne. Thank you so much for the invite and for the hype. Right, I'm absolutely honoured to be here, and yeah, loving seeing my face on the London buses like
that. Awesome. Well, yeah. Firstly, a massive thank you, Rod, for being with us. I'm very excited about this. We were connected by someone that we know. We've spoken a little bit, but as always, we like to try and keep this live and super fresh. So I've got a few questions I'd love to get into, and of course, some questions that will be coming in from different people around the world. We've got someone in here from Zambia. I saw we've got someone here from South Africa. So a truly global audience. A huge thank you to everyone connected in. So before we get into this, Rod, super simple question. How are you doing and where are you?
Okay, well, I'm doing well. I'm in Essex at the moment. So and Essex, just probably like the rest of the country that doesn't know what it wants to do with the weather. It's either been a long winter or we're going into the next winter already, right? So that's a bit of a mood sucker for us all, but I'm staying positive, optimistic, not letting the weather affect my internet too much at the moment. But yeah, really, really positive, working on a lot of new projects through IHCL, which I'm sure we're going to go into today.
Yeah, awesome. And I just saw we got someone dialed in from Cairo as well. So I'm sure that is definitely sunnier than Essex.
Lucky them.
Right. So greetings to everyone here from Cairo. So first observation, question, thought is, as we were in the setup for today, we were talking about this topic called learning to learn, or learning how to learn in brackets again, because we're going through this constant change. I mean, one of the things that we as a team have gotten to grips with is, working with Anthropic and utilizing the latest models that we can find with something like Claude. And Claude made me think quite a lot, actually, because when we go back to November, December last year, we weren't using Claude, and many of the things that we were doing have sort of now been massively transformed in the last 6 months with having access to some of these tools. And I'm sure in the next 3 to 6 months, it will transform again. So it feels like the pace of change is being ratcheted up all the time. Just when you think it can't get any more fever pitch, it seems to get more fever pitch. And it made me consider, I guess, how we're learning, because many organizations are still learning in the same way that they were, and the world is changing in a way that it never was, or never has done. So big question, big topic, and asking the question, are we learning in the wrong way, or do we need to rethink this thing here, how we learn?
Great question. Well, firstly, I think it's right to say there's no right or wrong way. Okay, the people need variety. The sort of learning styles myth has been debunked by research in recent years, and I think that's a good thing, because look, there's different hooks and different points of interest for everyone, and it really depends on what you want the outcome to be as to how you should design a learning experience. If you want somebody to pass a test, then rote learning is probably the best thing. If you want somebody to be able to recall a fact, then memory is the right thing. If you want skills and capability is a word I'm probably going to use a lot today. If you want to develop that in people, then experiential learning is the right thing. We've all probably sat through those click-through compliance-based online quizzes that we have to do for our work, and if you're anything like me, you probably get through those as quickly as possible. And I don't think that necessarily necessitates learning, and nor does it necessitate engagement, really. So a lot of the time, we're designing things for compliance sake because we feel it's the right thing, and we want a process to be gone through by a learner quickly and potentially remotely. If we want critical thinking, then traditional universities do a great job of that sort of Socratic discussion in a traditional way. But if you want an approach which really fits with modern society now, and if you look at every workplace, you look at universities, they're more diverse than ever before, and they'll continue to get even more diverse than ever before. And the range of backgrounds and experiences and intellects as well will become more diverse in all settings. So if you want something that's going to be suitable for a wider group of people, you're probably looking at a blended approach, but you're definitely looking at ways in which you can personalize learning and understand exactly what people need and what people want. But I'll come on to that in a little bit later, probably. But is a university absolutely fit for purpose for everyone? I think the jury's out there, in the same way that in work-based learning are click-through online courses that people are doing for just so they can tick a box to say they've completed their CPD for their quarterly one-to-one. That also isn't the right approach. So it definitely has to be personalized, and ultimately it depends what you want the outcome to be.
Well, this is an interesting point, because we're in the final stages of a pitch with they're in the automotive sector. Let's narrow it down like that. And then I had to give my final presentation to the leadership team, who would make the decision on whether or not they wanted to go through our world-class manager program. So the CFO said to me, Wayne, if we buy this program right now, what percentage of our managers are going to will complete the program? And I said to him, about 15%. And he said, that is the worst pitch I've ever heard. and as I was saying it, Rod, I was thinking that does sound pretty poor. But I said, look, the point is, the reason why we know it's 15% is because we track it rigorously. And if you put 100 people in a room and gave them training on something he picks a random 100 people in any organization, which is essentially what happens when people distribute training inside organizations, what percentage of people will do anything different after they leave the room? I'd say it was between 5 to 15%. And the only difference is we can track it because we can tell based on the stats on the data. And we had a really good debate when we won them in the end. We won the client. But I think it was about the honesty of what percentage of people will do something different with what they learn. And I think that's an interesting challenge, essentially now, because of like what you've described, something like critical thinking. Lots of organizations are saying to us, and even when you look at some of the big sort of thought leaders like the World Economic Forum, like you look at Concordia, a lot of these organizations will say that actually critical thinking is the most essential skill and trait of what we're seeing in the 21st century. And what we need is people to think critically, but also put that into action as fast as possible, because the world's changing so fast. So, the time lag gives you a massive competitive disadvantage the longer you take to do something. So I think there's a load here to unpack. And just before we get into this in more detail, because I'm sure there's lots of areas we can go, I'd love to learn a bit more about what you're doing, a bit about your background, Rod, your story, your journey, and why you created the ICHL.
Yeah, thanks, Wayne. Okay, so my background probably is, well, it's varied, right? So I didn't come from a family or a background that you would traditionally find yourself at university from. So I was brought up by grandparents in very rural Cornwall in a deprived area, and I was the first in my family to go to university. And that was an uncommon thing then, but it's becoming more of a common thing that I hear and that people say. But what I can definitely say is university and education gave me a chance to change my life, right? And there's no doubt about that. I'm a big believer in widening participation because of that, big believer in accessibility. But learning doesn't stop just by having accessibility, right? Learning has to be engaging, and it has to move somebody towards something. There has to be an element of social mobility. So I've worked in education for the last 20 years, but equally, whilst I was a student and after that, I'd varied roles, learning skills along the way, picking things up, lots of entry-level management experience, sales experience, a wide range of things, which I think suits a portfolio career and allows teaching to sort of be more relevant to a wide range of people. Social mobility is hard to achieve alone, right? People need supporters around them, and they need guidance as to how they achieve that. So we set up IHCL with that in mind, to give people an opportunity to access education, but to be successful in that education. So something that we're big believers in is the support mechanism that students have. And students that don't come from traditional backgrounds, they may be mature learners, they may be returners to education, could be people who are working and underemployed with the potential to do a lot more. It could be people who haven't met their potential yet academically. But what they often need is an academic coach, which all of our students get to help them through the academic challenges, but also a professional mentor. So mentoring for the sake of capability is really important to us. So for us, IHCL, it isn't simply about delivering qualifications. And I think that's one of the dangers that lots of higher education institutions and maybe schools too fall into. They deliver things, they get to an end point, they rush people towards completing a degree, a GCSE, a qualification. We're about everything else that goes alongside that to develop the person, right? So I'm a big believer of experiential learning and what that gives individuals holistically in terms of skills and capability. So we've developed something that is not only accessible, but it's something that gives people different routes through their learning to make it achievable for them. We've got a pedagogic model that's unique. It's called the ACEL model, which is adaptive chunked experiential learning. I'm not going to get into much of the technicalities here, but it breaks down learning in a way. It breaks down learning in a way that makes all the elements of learning achievable to everybody, no matter what their background is.
Wow. And just, I'd love to learn a bit more about that. I mean, why did you develop it? How did you develop that?
So I studied law at university, and it bored me senseless most of the time. That's the reality. I sat in lectures, probably near the back of the lecture theatre, where I wouldn't be asked questions. I was totally anonymous in the lectures. I went to seminars for those teachers that I enjoyed learning from, or those subjects that I enjoyed, but I wasn't a great student, right? So I understand what it's like to study something at a level which challenges you, which is a good thing, but not be engaged by the way it's being taught. So fast forward from that 10 years, and I was teaching law. And I decided then that in order to engage people, and like I said, the wide, diverse group of students that I was teaching at the time, it had to be taught differently. So I fell into what I didn't know at the time was experiential teaching. So teaching people through role plays, simulations, gamified learning, and making sure that they were going through a process like we do in life, where sometimes we fail, sometimes we do things and we make mistakes, but we're reflecting constantly, and it's a safe space to make mistakes. So that was developed over time into a model where it incorporates 6 different elements that we feel are necessary for a student to be able to learn. So the first element is study skills, understanding what they need to be able to do to learn in that week, sort of preloading them with information. The second is expert input. So that's where the content comes in, although I hate the word content. The third is an experiential activity. They then move on to some sort of assessment, get feedback on that assessment, and then they reflect at the end. So if you think about experiential learning, or the cold model of experiential learning, and then you supercharge it, it's that.
Wow. I mean, this is really exciting for me personally, because, you know, the journey we've been through, and I think what we developed over the years wasn't, we went into the world of developing managers in an ultra naive way, right? Because it wasn't our background at all. We'd been in the business of driving employee engagement programs, and in which, if you're successful at driving an employee engagement program, you've got to really work hard to get the hearts and minds of people, and you can't convince them. It's not about, you know, good, well-worded and well-meaning sound bites and communication pieces. You genuinely got to connect with people and get them to change their behavior, because you've got to get people, in some senses, moving from going that way to that way, which is a monumental change for most people. We then focused on, we recognized that the manager problem was a real problem, because it's the manager who's the key. The manager drives the relationship. They own the culture. They own all that stuff. But often the role of the manager wasn't focused on that much in organizations. And most leaders told us that they wanted better managers or world-class managers. And then we went about how to design that, how to fix that problem. But we didn't do it because we'd read lots of documentation on how to build manager training programs. And what we did is we did it in a way in the wild, Rod. You know, we built something that got tested immediately by the real world, and it spat it out, right? As is the process in learning in the real world, right? You fail fast because people tell you this is not it. We don't want it this way. It needs to be another way. Do it a different way. And we had to refine and refine and refine. And strangely and anthropically, if you look at it, in the wild, we ended up with a process which I think pretty much, and I'll share this with you after, but it pretty much matches perfectly what you've described as the steps that you've gone through, purely because we've been beaten up and tested in the market for 10 years around the world, of trying to perfect an approach that actually works for managers. And when we say actually works, they're able to put it into practice. You know, and you mentioned the word earlier when you talked about building capability, because that's, you know, everything that we're focused on. So I'd love to sort of jump to that really and get your thoughts on, you know, this idea of knowledge versus capability, because a lot of organizations are throwing stuff at people in the idea that it's going to build knowledge, but actually does it build capability? And I'd love to get your thoughts on how that works.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, the first thing to note is content is absolutely readily available, right? So content is everywhere, and people can find that far more easily now than when I was at university, but that's growing and developing all the time. If I look at my 17-year-old son who was homeschooled and effectively did really well at teaching himself a lot of things, has learned the skills to be able to teach himself now through his A-levels, and will set him up for his university studies as well. So content is everywhere. Knowledge is what you retain, but capability is what you do with that, right? Capability is the skills and the experience and the ability to be able to use some of that knowledge, or some of the knowledge that you haven't found as well, whether that be pure theoretical knowledge or knowledge about yourself and the way you work, to be able to use that in a practical way. Because using AI doesn't make a person capable. And we naively use AI, and I do it, and I get confident, competent answers back. And I think, well, that's great, because now I know that. And in the same way as if I read a textbook, it doesn't make me capable. It may give me some knowledge if I retain it in that way. In the same way as sitting in a lecture theatre doesn't give me a capability to do anything. And I was thinking about this the other day, actually, that I recently pointed my patio, right? And I am not a handyman by any stretch of the imagination, Wayne, but I thought I'll give this a go. How hard can it be, right? So I watched a couple of YouTube videos, and in the process, I learned how to do it. I learned how to make the sand and cement and the right consistency and the right amount of water that you have in it. And then I gave it a go. And I soon realized whilst I was doing it, that actually the sand and cement soon gets dry, for instance, and you need to put more water in, or if you put too much water in, it makes a mess of the patio and it stains it. So the learning comes about through the doing, not from the knowledge that I'm preloading myself with, because by watching that YouTube video, it looks really easy to be able to do that. And I think I can do that, no problem. I'll set aside a couple of hours to do that. The reality is, one, it's much harder, but two, I'm starting from an absolute base level and I'm going to make mistakes. And whilst doing that, I was thinking about all the things I needed to do differently. So the important thing is that, look, capability comes from experience, it comes from practice and failure. But the real key to that, there are two elements of experiential learning that I don't think people necessarily do consciously enough. And when I say experiential learning, this could be experiential learning that's set up by teachers, by managers, but equally, it's how we live our lives, right? And there are two elements to it that are really important that can't be missed off if you truly want to learn. One is reflection with a C, how we reflect afterwards, whether we are embracing the mistakes that we made, analyzing what we would do differently next time, what were we pleased with, what didn't work, but also reflection or reflexivity with an X. And that is the ability to quickly think on our feet whilst undertaking an exercise, right? So you may change direction. You may quickly learn that, for instance, in this case, the sand and cement mix wasn't right, or for some size cracks in the patio, I needed certain tools that I didn't have, right? And that's being reflexive. So it's constantly thinking all the time, what can I do differently? And the need to be reflexive is a soft skill in the workplace that we all have to have. It's thinking about people's body language. It's thinking about their reactions and then what we go on to do differently. So we need that in meetings. We need it in terms of how we produce work, almost in everything we do, but we don't think about it. So some people do this well consciously because they've developed this reflexive skill, and other people need to be a bit more deliberate with it. And that's all absolutely fine. But look, knowledge and content is everywhere, but capability is rare. And that's the thing that we need to work on.
Wow. So reflexivity, I love the concept of this. Brilliant. Is this nature or nurture?
Well, it's both. It's both. And that's not a cop out on me sitting on the fence, because I truly believe that most things in terms of learning and skills can be learned. Yeah. They're nurture. They're not naturally inherent in us. They're not genetically disposed to us, so we can develop these things all the time. But do we have the upbringing, the emotional intelligence, the predilection to want to develop them? And also, do we want to put ourselves in positions where we're uncomfortable and we're out of our comfort zone? That really is where we're developing those skills. Yeah. But people often shy away from embracing those opportunities.
So then as a very, very busy modern manager, with like your diary absolutely full all the time, because we work with one of the big transport organizations in the UK, and I was there on, where are we now? Thursday. I was there on Tuesday. And one of the things we were talking through on Tuesday was this time conundrum. So it's strange because you find some leaders in some organizations who manage to become tremendously successful and effective. They're not just sort of building empires, but their team like them. They've got great cultures. They're achieving good results for the people they're designed to deliver for. And then you've got other people who look at them and say, I would love to achieve that sort of stuff, but I just don't have the time. So the people run into the time conundrum all the time. And I think for most people, it is a true problem because people are stacked. And, organizations don't come along and say, next year, Rod, the plan is that we're going to grow this business by 10%. Oh, and by the way, Rod, you've also got 10% more resource for your team. Good luck. Yeah. That doesn't happen. It's always, we want more with essentially the same resource. So given when we think about reflexivity, which I really love, is could you build that into your week? Like if you were planning out like a dream week in the life of an effective team in an organization, maybe not this week because this week's busy, but maybe in a few weeks' time, what is there? How would you structure your week? Like, would you build in half a day to sit and reflect on stuff? Like, how would you do that proactively as a manager?
Well, if I was a manager, I'd be having discussions with my team over how it works best for them. So you're absolutely right. Like one of the biggest challenges, as we know, managers will say it, staff will say it, academics, students, everybody is pressed for time, right? We're all trying to do too much and not spending the time on things that can be really beneficial to us. So often learning in organizations is learning for compliance sake, right? It's just going through a process to be able to say that somebody has done something.
Yeah.
What I think organizations need to try to do is to put time aside and make sure that the learning for the individual is personalized as much as it can be. So for me personally, it's not formal journaling, but it's certainly having a notebook that I'm going through every day, that I'm using, that I'm making notes on, and it's beyond a to-do list, but it's consciously being aware of what my objectives and my tasks are, but also it's building in time to think about how I feel about those tasks. Okay. So I think a lot of the time, because our time is stretched in the workplace, one-to-ones can be very structured. And I can remember when I was first a manager and I worked for RBS in the insurance industry, everything was incredibly structured. We had templates for every meeting that you would have. We had interview notes for candidates where the feedback was, if a person looks as though they would come up with great ideas, we should refuse them the job, because entry-level people shouldn't be seen as being rebellious towards the organization, and they saw creativity as rebellion. The truth is, putting time aside to have those discussions regularly is crucial, because without that, the manager doesn't know what the individual needs. And sometimes the tendency is that a manager can think that they're doing the right thing because there's a one-to-one that's booked in and they would go through the tasks for the week. But it's important to know how people are feeling when they're undertaking the tasks and how motivated they are, because ultimately that then is what allows the manager to help to support them.
Yeah. And I get that. I sort of trying to put myself in your shoes, right? I mean, you're in this quite unique world in a way, because, you're running a higher education organization, which is designed to help people to learn. And you're also at the same time running an organization, employing people yourself, trying to create a learning organization that enables people to learn who help people to learn.
Yeah.
So you couldn't find someone who has to live and breathe this more than you do. I mean, this is quite a unique position to be in.
And I think, everything really comes back to the basics of the first team I ever managed. I had the strong view that if they were happy coming to work, they would deliver, right? So I think that is the initial basis that managers ought to have. This sort of view of, having a job or a career that's the ikigai, isn't it? It's like the central purpose, and it combines everything: your skills, your passion, your abilities. that's the dream, right? But it's not necessarily the reality for a lot of people. So for a lot of people, you do have to figure out, well, what is it that can motivate them and make them tick and come to work and be happy to do this work? Now, again, there's no one size fits all on that. You could have 100 people doing the same job, but think completely differently from person to person over how to do that job, what they need to do that job, and what elements of that they're happy with. But the only way you find that out is by having the conversations with them. And having the conversations with them probably then leads to a position where you realize that people need support, and there are different ways that you can give them that support. For us as an institution with our students, it's through coaching and mentoring, which are two really important aspects of how an individual learns, but also how that connection between a teacher and a student, or a manager and an employee, how that is maximized.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think people also get that a little bit. There's a blurred line between what's coaching, what's mentoring. I mean, I have a couple of people who I would regard as mentors, and then probably a couple of people who I regard as coaches. And I think they're very different in what I need from those relationships. And I was quite struck when you said at the beginning, within IHCL, everybody has access to a coach and a mentor, which I just think is what an awesome approach. I mean, could you explain a little bit more about why? Because I don't know this, but why did you do that, and how did you do it? Because I'm sure a lot of organizations would say, great idea, just don't have the resource to do that.
Yeah. Well, in answer to the final point, you've got to make the resource. Okay, so
Nice.
in the same way that employees need support, students need it. So it goes beyond the classroom. So I can't be an advocate for merely classroom learning, and I've had experiences teaching where students have a great time. They feel like they've learned. I can see through their assignments that they appear to have learned. But so what? So they've learnt to do well in the assignment, and they present themselves well in class. But what's the next point on? So the classroom experience, teachers should be able to handle. The way students go about their learning and whether they really understand what they're learning, that for us is the role of a coach to assist them with. And a coach is asking deliberate questions of students, and it's going through a sort of quasi-structured approach to understand what that student has learned through the week, what they've struggled with, what other assistance they need, and it's putting in place the building blocks to help them with their studies. A mentor is slightly different, and I see the role of a mentor being completely different aside from learning. And I think a mentor, interesting to hear that you've got a mentor or mentors, Wayne, because mentors can almost be anyone for anyone with different angles. So for us, our students have professional mentors, and the role of the professional mentor is to consider how the student contextualizes their learning. That's also part of the experiential cycle, the Kolb cycle, right? How we contextualize what we've learned in our own life. And for us, for our students, it's how we can help them contextualize their learning in their lives for their careers. So it may be that a student is, let's say they might be studying for a master's degree, and they've got a degree, but they're underemployed. Maybe they're a delivery driver, right? Or they're working in a call center, and they're not doing anything that's related to their degree, and they desperately want to get into the industry that they dreamt about. Well, they need professional mentoring from somebody who understands personally what their dreams are, what their abilities are, how they can help shape their abilities, whether they need to rewrite their CV, how they're applying for jobs, and also, possibly more importantly, the soft skills that they have and the soft skills they need to develop. Right? And that's something that comes about naturally through experiential learning, but equally individuals often need to be pointed in the right direction for that. And when it comes to mentoring, a concept that I used at a previous organization that I worked with was something called a mentor web. So I think we often associate mentors as being people who already have knowledge. They are above us in the pecking order. They've been there, they've done it. They're probably older, they're more experienced. It's not necessarily the case. Actually, a mentor can sometimes be the person who sees things from a completely different angle. So in one of my past colleges, we set up a mentor web where an individual would have at least 2 mentors from different areas of the business. One was likely to be more experienced than them, one less experienced than them. And the beauty of those conversations then is people really think about the different approaches that they in their role can go through. And look, when it comes to making time, this doesn't have to be absolutely formal of an hour a week. This can be a 5 to 10 minute catch up. And in fact, often that's the best way to do it, because then people focus on the one thing that's really important to them this week, the one challenge that they have to overcome. And how would you go about this? Give me some pointers. And it becomes not only a great way to frame things and think about what you need to learn and what you maybe need to do differently, but also it builds great connections with teams. So I can't advocate for mentoring highly enough, but I think the sort of concept of a mentor web or reverse mentoring is something that organizations can use, especially
now. I mean, I show my age, I'm 50 in a few weeks actually, but I left university in 1998 and then went to work for Deloitte, or Arthur Andersen as it was in Deloitte. And at Deloitte, they were having us as reverse mentors on things like WAP technology, because that was the new mobile technology at the time. It was kind of an AI equivalent, obviously .com boom as we headed into the late 90s. And the idea was that you take somebody who's fresh, like got their finger on the pulse more, they're probably having more socialized conversations, learning about what's happening with this new technology. And they were pairing young people with more seasoned partners of the business. And the great thing about it was, as a junior person, you got to develop relationships with really senior people that you probably wouldn't bump into because they're not in your social circle yet. So you got the benefit of that. And then they got the benefit of some rapid learning from somebody who really had their finger on the pulse. But it was such a brilliant idea. Yeah. Which is why I think I always saw the value of the mentor relationship. And just to touch on the guy who is one of my mentors now, he's interesting. I mean, he is like business-wise and all that stuff, very successful, much more successful than I've yet to become as an entrepreneur. And, he's had a very few successful exits of companies. Great guy as well, very brilliant. Interestingly with him, when I meet him on a regular basis, I tend to have not such a good day after. Not because he's horrible, but because he asks these questions, Rod, which really make me think. I sort of go into the meeting thinking I'm doing pretty good. And then he asked me something. I'm like, oh my God, why didn't I think of that? That's so right. That's so obvious. That's so brilliant. And then I leave there. And sometimes I'll debate with him, like, 'cause I don't like to accept in the heat of the moment that he's absolutely right and I'm wrong. And then I'll leave there and I think absolutely he was right. And I usually message him like, that was so good. Thank you so much. And in the end, like the last time we met, I actually just sketched out, he like talked me through this model, which I sketched out. And I took a photo of it and I've still got it. I need to share it back with him actually. But yeah, the mental relationship with him is something that's actually quite, on my side anyway, it's quite abrasive in a good way, because it really challenges. And what it does is it challenges my view of reality, because you think, and we see this all the time in organizations, people fall into this emperor's new clothes type moment, certainly with the more senior folk, that they've got other senior people around them and keep telling them that the world's a certain way, and it's not that way. And we found this in a few organizations, just to touch on. I won't go into them, but I talk about them a lot. It's a hotelier. And one of the things that they do is every Monday morning, the leadership team meet and they essentially discuss reality, what's going on in their world. They're looking at customer reviews, feedback, but they don't go longer than 7 days as a leadership team without a reality check. And you think, for most leadership teams, how frequently do they actually test reality? It's quite infrequent. So they build up a picture of the world, which is not true. It's reinforced by other people around them because they agree with the messaging. So you you can understand how these myths start to be birthed in an organization, not because there was someone who was lying, but because everyone believes in this collective lie, or collective untruth, and which becomes reality. And then the reality dictates how people behave. And then they're shocked when reality isn't the way they thought it was. And there's notable examples of that, big ones like Toys R Us. I'd read something on Toys R Us actually that said, in the lead up to the demise of Toys R Us, there were lots of people advising them that slime is a thing. there's this slime craze that's going nuts. Kids are making slime everywhere. Why don't you put slime stations in the sort of entry areas of Toys R Us? Bring in parents, and it'll bring in the kids. Let them mess around with slime, and then they're in the store. But everyone, apparently, someone at Toys R Us was like, "No, that's like a ridiculous idea." But again, and as Rob Snyder, who is our definite, brilliant, most excellent contributor today, he said, about humility, and I think that's the thing. It needs you to accept that maybe you don't know the answer, which is why the mentor relationship can be so valuable. But yeah, brilliant. One thing I'd like to ask people to do is, for those of you who've been contributing, like the brilliant Rob Snyder, is to think about formulating some of these statements into some questions that I'd love to put to Dr. Rod in a moment. And we've got some of my team on the line who are going to take some of those questions and put them through to make sure that we can do that in the time, because there's some really awesome contributions from Naomi, from Freddie, Gilmara, seen here live with us. I think we've got Elias here from Athens as well. So thank you very much for your contributions, and we'll get into this. One question I've got, Rod, is about, and this is that everywhere, right? The future of learning, future of AI, all this stuff. When you think about what you're doing now, how different do you think what you're doing is now versus what you think you might need to do in the next, let's make it shorter term, like the next 12 months, given the rate of change? And how are you proactively trying to adapt to what's changing?
Great question. Well, I think higher education in the main needs to adapt. Is what I'd say, because people are adapting and their needs are completely changing on a, like you say, all the time. So in 12 months time, things will look very different. AI is obviously huge, and I use it. Everybody in the main uses it, and Luddites are going to get left behind, right? So the use of AI is a really positive thing. But what's important is that people use it ethically, use it responsibly, use it and understand that there is a criticality that needs to associate with that. And don't be naive enough to think that just by undertaking a process using AI, it makes you any better at what you're doing, or any more knowledgeable, or any more capable. But in terms of the future, I think higher education and work-based learning, if you like, or professional learning will become much closer together. And I'm not saying that for all types of higher education. Some universities, certain subjects, certain courses, certain universities ought to stay academic, ought to be research-based, and they ought to carry on in the sort of traditional vein of universities in the past. But for universities to adapt to what people need nowadays, and the fact that we have so many NEETs who aren't in education or training, the fact that we have people who are graduates but can't get a job or are underemployed, and there's hundreds of thousands of those that are competing for tens of thousands of graduate jobs every year. So the numbers don't add up. What I think that will mean is that the future will be something between an apprenticeship and a degree. Apprenticeships are great, right? And they could have, and still could potentially be, the answer. But there's a lot of red tape that goes around them that employers and often students don't necessarily want. They also are frightened in many cases that if they go down an apprenticeship route, that they're missing out on a formal qualification or a degree. So degree apprenticeships were created. Perfect degree apprenticeships, right? You get everything if you're the individual. You get the work-based learning, the qualification, and it's funded for you. But degree apprenticeships are now the preserve of middle classes, right? The people that they weren't probably set up for. So apprenticeships are great in the same way as degrees are great, because they're great for academic study, critical thinking, research. There's a hybrid that's in between that I think higher education will move towards. So that hybrid is probably blended. It's in part online for the convenience sake, and in some cases the pedagogic sake. There's face-to-face and experiential elements of that too, and it's work-based in order for people to have an opportunity to see the system, to see how other people work, to model them, to understand from experience what's expected of them when they enter the workplace. But who's going to pay for all that is the answer. So there isn't the funding from government that's going to be coming into that anytime soon. The Department for Education wouldn't see that as a scalable enough model, probably for enough people to go into. But I challenged that. And something we're working on at IHCL is called an employment accelerated masters. And what that is, in effect, is a master's degree where students learn online, but they also have some face-to-face activities with the teachers as well. But they are given an opportunity in the workplace. Now, that opportunity in the workplace is, if you like, their second day of study. They do a day of study online, they do a day of workplace learning, and they get a master's degree for that, but they get a place in the workplace too. And this is supported by coaches and mentors in the same way as purely an online one would be. So, look, I think qualifications matter and degrees are important, but capability and skills probably in the long run matter more for an individual. So I think the future is a closer tie between industry and higher education adapting what it does to give individuals and industry what it needs.
Well, firstly, I mean, what a brilliant structures to have that in the, baked into the master's program, to have actual real access to industry or organizations. So it's becoming part of the process. And I guess then my question, maybe it's a bigger topic for another time, but is who drives this? I mean, what you're describing, I think, is absolutely spot on. And it sort of straddles, in a way, two worlds, but it needs someone at national level anyway. If this is going to be a capability building process at national level for skills, you've got to have that push from government. I'm not obviously arguing for or against here when it comes to what our government are or aren't doing, but surely it needs that sort of centralized push.
Well, yes, of course it does, and it always does, right? Change does, and one of the difficulties we've got, let's not get into politics too much, but I think one of the difficulties we always have with things like this is that governments and departments are often quite short-sighted, and they're thinking about the now, they're thinking about what they in their individual role can do, thinking about the next election, rather than in 20 years' time, what are people going to need? And in 20 years' time, well, goodness knows, let's say 5 years' time, everybody's going to be using AI. That's going to be a part of everyone's role. So there's going to be a bigger gap between those that are working in professional context and those that are learning for degrees and those that are meeting skills-based courses. So, the dearth of, and the great opportunity that's out there actually for people in industries such as in service industries and in plumbing, builders, electricians, huge opportunity for people to set up careers in that way and probably become more employable with higher salaries than those that have formal degrees. So, the world has changed and almost gone back on itself. So for sure it needs driving at government level, but we all have a responsibility because education is one of the most important things in society. So if you're working in industry and you're thinking that, well, we can't employ the right people, or the people we employ don't have the skills we need, and there's a big, long process that we go through to recruit people and then to upskill them, maybe think about what you can do differently. And look, I'm glad I'm having this opportunity to talk to you and the people out there, because we want to help industry get the right students in to be able to hit the ground running. And a lot of that is done whilst on the job and can't be learnt beforehand.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, to help with this, if you're not already connected to Dr. Rod Brazier, then you can QR code him right now on the screen, and this will take you to his LinkedIn page, and you can connect. You can connect with Dr. Rod. So I'm interested in this. We had a delegation that we met with from Beijing, who are well, I guess there was about 30 or so people that had come from different companies to the UK, and I've met with a few of them as part of this delegation. And this one guy really blew my mind. So he wasn't from Beijing, he was from Shanghai, and they had a steel business. And he said, actually, in typical Chinese fashion, he said, we have a medium-sized company, and we have a bit of a challenge. I said, how many people do you have? And he said 30,000. I said, that's not so medium-sized, but 30,000 people. And the question he asked me really shocked me, because he said, where are many of the companies in the UK focused on over the next 10 years? And I said, well, firstly, we don't talk about 10 years. We talk about the next quarter, or the next year or two maybe, but 10 years is much further out than most organizations talk about. Whereas obviously in a lot of countries like China, like Mongolia, like many of the Gulf states, you've got these long range 20, 30, 40 year visions, which I think actually are probably quite helpful based on what I've seen. And the thing that blew me away, Rod, was he said, I said, well, what about you? He said, over the next 10 years, we are heavily focused, huge investment going into knowledge management. I said, really? Like, knowledge management was a terminology that we sort of chewed up and spat out and moved on with in the sort of late 90s, early 2000s in many corporations. And he said that, and I said, could you explain a bit more? He said, well, yeah, because we look at the idea of transmission of knowledge gives us a competitive advantage. So we're really focused on how do we connect up our organization and transmit knowledge at, like super speed. I thought, wow, like what a fantastic focus. And it wasn't like they want to create an intranet and a knowledge sort of document library. It's not that sort of knowledge management. I just thought this is like really smart thinking here. And you can understand why these organizations are out beating everybody in their sort of competitive market. But brilliant. So we have a question coming in. I'm conscious of time. We've probably got a few minutes left. So question coming in. We see this the same time as you see this. So very much. Thank you very much to Nikki Tijani. Thank you so much for this insight. Rod, I'm reading this because of course you can read, but people might be listening in. Thank you so much for this insight, Rod. It's brilliant. How do you see this being applied in the work environment where most interviews are conducted based on the future role instead of how current experiences can be applied to future roles? What a brilliant question, Nikki. Thank you very much. Rod, over to you.
Okay. Yeah, great question. I mean, there's so much to unpick from that, but I think the first thing to note from that is a CV doesn't tell us everything that we need to know about an individual, right? And that's one of the problems that we have with recruitment in general and the scale at which large companies recruit. We often have no more to go off than a CV and what we see in front of us in terms of writing. And that's fundamentally wrong, I think. So I'd urge people to look beyond the CV and think about ways that they can have a recruitment process where they're genuinely testing people through some sort of experiential assessment, if you like, a type 2 assessment, to learn a bit about their capability, maybe a bit about their emotional intelligence and their skills to be able to do a role. And one element of that that's important is the soft skills that people have and their willingness to be part of a team, to learn while they go, to embrace mistakes and all of the things that I've spoken about today. So I would say try to make interviews as real life and as experiential as you can for the skills that you're looking for. But in terms of what's needed for future roles, that boils down to, and that's an unknown thing, right? So sometimes that's about reflective and how emotional intelligent an individual is to embrace what they need to do to change for the future.
Yeah.
Which is a skill that we can assess.
Yeah, brilliant response. Thank you. And I think, with most, with many different interview processes that we've come across, I think one of the most brilliant things, Nikki, we've seen is where organizations tend to be very honest about what the actual job is going to be like, because there's a game that often gets played. You've got the recruiter playing a game because the recruiter's incentive, remember, in many cases is to get their commission. I'm not trying to talk down recruitment firms here, but we understand how the game works. You've got the recruiting manager inside the organization who might not actually understand what the organization needs because they're working off of a different strategic understanding of the organization. And then you've got the individual's desires and they're trying to play a game to get the role that they want. So there's all this dynamic at play, which doesn't bode well for an honest conversation about what's needed and what the skill set might actually be. So I think, we've come across a few organizations. I won't name, there's one we came across, they're a software development company, and they had the most exceptional engagement score. And I found out why, because the recruitment process is brutally honest about what the job actually entails, the downsides and the upsides of it. And they recruited people in full conscious knowledge that this was going to be, what it was in the end. So
I was just going to say, that is so important, isn't it? That honesty, because if everybody, the recruiting company, the recruitment agent, the individual were all absolutely honest on the way things were and what they wanted, more people would end up in the roles that are right for them and be retained by that organization. So yeah, I mean, that in itself is a lesson. We don't all have to play the game, but if we want to end up where we want to end up, we have to be honest and sometimes accept that that we might fail and that we might not get the job that we're applying for, but that doesn't mean that we're not going to end up where we should end up.
Yeah, absolutely. Very good. We had a question that just popped up from Freddie, a beautiful Frenchman. Here he is. I've read that more and more younger people feel that the cost/value of universities is no longer worth it. With all our social issues going on, should we not focus on taking a quota of younger people and put them into the military, citizenship learning, care and the NHS, and solving the big issues of our planet rather than giving them tools that no longer fulfill our modern needs? Well, what a big question. Thank you very much, Freddie. Rod, what are your thoughts?
Great question. How to answer this one without any controversy? Look, there's a lot of ways around this, Wayne, isn't there? You know, people talk about national service in some countries that works, and I've read recently there's been a bit of a call for national service to be returned back to this country. I do think community and citizenship is vital, right? And universities also, many do and can do more to do their bit around that in the same way as colleges and schools can. But what happens to that missing gap, I suppose, is the question. The person who maybe has studied for GCSEs or A levels and then is unemployed, or people that aren't able to access employment for other reasons. What do we do to offer them? And I think for sure there are community activities that people can be taking part in to give back and to help society grow. But it's probably, again, partly comes back to funding and the driving of that for political purposes. So do I believe in it? Yes, because I believe in experiential learning. So in my view, people should welcome the challenge of doing something, doing anything that may take them out of their comfort zone and challenge them, because by doing that in itself, they are upskilling themselves. So the benefits that an individual gets back from that, even if it's voluntary, even if it's something that they don't feel that they like at the time. I've had a hell of a lot of part-time jobs when I was a student that I didn't like, right? But I look back on them now and I can pinpoint the different things I got from all of them and how that led me to the career I've had. So embrace it and do it and try to encourage others to. But yeah, it's a hornet's nest of political drive, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And it makes me think, maybe Freddie, building on what you just said there, you know, if this was an organization and you were looking at developing, you know, you've got a budget, because there's always going to be a finite budget, no matter what organization is, there's always a finite budget. The best thing that you'd start to do is like some sort of needs and skills analysis, when you'd look at what's actually needed, given the fact that we've got competition and there's the market and there's the regulator and there's all these things that you have to face off as an organization. What are the actual needs here, and where would you then employ the investment? So I think, you know, this could be something at national level. There probably could be a relook at some sort of needs assessment of what we need as a country going forward. Maybe Freddie, you found a new opportunity here, and then start to figure out how we best then deploy the skills and the talents and the brilliance of the people we've got. Rod, I'm conscious of time. If I could ask you one last question, I've got and it wasn't a planned question at all. I'd just love to get a sense of, you know, what's your sort of your dream, your vision for what it is that you're creating with IHCL. So again, we sort of, you know, if we did this interview again in a few years, you know, what would you want to see as a result of your work and the impact that you're making with the students and learners you work with?
Well, I'd want to see that people felt that education was for all, which I think it's come a long way to be that, but it still isn't there. And that there can be a structured route through higher education, which is suitable for different types of people from different backgrounds, but one that's fun and engaging and builds skills and isn't purely about the test, the degree, the certificate. It's about the capabilities and making sure that people have got an output that they can then contribute back to society with. And also one where we don't believe that the assessment and the sort of monitoring and metrics around learning are the important thing, but the important thing is the processes that people go through and that willingness, like I said, to fail, right? If there was one piece of advice I'd have, it would be to anyone to do something different and challenging every day, to get out of their comfort zone, to learn by being autonomous and trying something that's gonna challenge them. Failure isn't, I think people sometimes think failure is the opposite of learning, and it isn't. It's the prerequisite for learning, because
I love that.
It's
That's
that,
so
it's the failure and the adaptation of what we do that creates the deep learning for the future.
Wow. Well, what a perfect way to end this. Honestly, Rod, I've been involved around lots of different organizations and leaders, and I genuinely have found this thoroughly enjoyable and also learned a lot from listening to you over the last hour. So a huge thank you for being so generous with your time and your insights. Absolutely second what Martin said, absolutely informative. And I think, as well as you talked about, you're the embodiment of this building capability, because much of what you described, I think, can be put into play like by lunchtime today, certainly if you're in the UK anyway. So a huge thank you to Rod, huge thank you to everyone who's taken part in today's session and contributed ideas and thoughts. And I know there's many more questions and we've probably got time to answer. We'll try to get those on the various platforms as well. Look forward to seeing you in another session. And hopefully, Rod, if you'd be up for it, I'd love to get into this more with you down the line, because I think there's so much more we can get into that I don't think we got to today. So a huge thank you for your time as well. And look forward to seeing everyone again very soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Wayne.